Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode we're doing a top 10. Topic of the top 10? Top 10 AEW signings so far. Now, we're coming off of two major signings in AEW, Will Ospreay and Kazuchika Okada, and a rumored signing, which hasn't happened yet, of Sasha Banks, aka Mercedes Moné. So it got me thinking, what do I think their best signings up till now have been? So I decided to make this list. With that being said, let's jump right in. Starting at number 10, one of the guys I just mentioned, Kazuchika Okada. Now, we're very early into the Kazuchika Okada AEW run, and if you check back with me maybe 3-5 years from now, he might be their best signing ever. When you look at Kazuchika Okada, he is absolutely one of the best wrestlers of all time. He's a top 5 wrestler in the history of Japan. He's put on some of the best matches of the last decade and a half. He's an absolutely transcendent, game-changing talent. Now, it's to be seen if that's going to carry over into a mostly English-speaking audience, if that Rainmaker persona is going to carry over, if his charisma is going to carry over. I know whenever I watch him, I feel that way. And I kind of think him being in AEW, it's not where I wanted him to go. I kind of wanted to see what he could do in WWE. I feel like we've seen Okada in AEW with the Forbidden Door stuff, but I think it's still going to be a good fit, because this is the place where we could see him have some of those epic matches, whether it be another match with Danielson, rekindling the feud with Kenny Omega, others on the roster like Jay White and Will Ospreay that he's feuded with in the past, matchups with Samoa Joe, Swerve Strickland. I mean, he can have some great matchups there that's only going to bolster what I think the difference between AEW and WWE is. WWE, and I mean this in not a negative way, WWE is more of a sports entertainment product, whereas AEW is more of a pro wrestling product. And I think that's where he's going to thrive. I'll go from that, our number 9. The Exalted One, Brody Lee. Unfortunately for us as fans, we only got to see the very tip of the iceberg with Brody Lee. What he could have done in AEW. How many more accolades would Brody Lee have had if, unfortunately, he didn't pass away so young? Would he have been a world champion by now? Almost certainly. Would he have had a bunch of banger matchups? I mean, think of all the people that have come since he's passed. A match with someone like Malachi Black, or Buddy Matthews, or Swerve, or Samoa Joe. All the matches he could have had, all the feuds he could have had. His feud with Cody Rhodes, I think, is still one of the best in AEW history. His impact is still being felt on the company today, and it's a shame that we didn't get to see more of him, but I'm happy for what we did get of him, because I think Brody Lee is absolutely awesome. I'll go from that, our number 8. Probably, in the beginning, one of the most important signings. However, I feel like he's lost some of that shine over the 5 years, and that's Chris Jericho, the Ocho. And I kind of feel, and I've heard other people say this, he feels almost like a Colin Robinson from What We Do in the Shadows, an energy vampire, where everybody that gets attached to him comes out worst afterwards. Whether that be the Pinnacle, the Inner Circle, different feuds he's had with different wrestlers. For someone that's thrived through his career on reinventing, I feel like his AEW run has been very stagnant for a very long time. And don't get me wrong, he was a major part of AEW becoming AEW, because here we have a bankable name, a named talent, a star that we could put on the posters, put out the press releases. TBS and TNT can show him in the commercials and people know who he is. He was very important in that role early on. I just think as the years have gone on, he's grown stagnant and he's not as important now as he once was. That's why he's so low on my list. But absolute, in my opinion, probably one of the top 10 to 20 wrestlers of all time. Definitely a big impact. It just hasn't been a lasting impact. Now going from that, our number 7, Samoa Joe. And the way I look at it, currently Samoa Joe is their world champion. He's been their TNT champion. And I feel like Samoa Joe gives a credibility to the company that almost no wrestler other than him would. Samoa Joe is one of those guys that's just awesome at everything he does. And it feels like no matter what you do with Joe, he elevates it, whether it be the TNT Championship, whether it be the World Championship, no matter what feud he's in. I think Joe is that guy. And in a different way than Jericho, where Jericho brought eyes from him being such a big star, Joe's been a star. Joe's a known talent in wrestling. I think Joe's more of the guy that when you tune in to see someone like Jericho that you know, Joe is someone you stay for. Joe's a reason to come back and back to the show. In my opinion, he's one of the best signings they've had, hence why he's on my list. I'll go from that our number 6. Probably the most controversial person on this list. That's the cult of personality, CM Punk. Now, we could all talk about the end of his run there and the last year or so of his run, which didn't go well at all. We can all admit that. However, there was such a big buzz about CM Punk's return to wrestling and how many new viewers it brought into wrestling, how many new viewers turned into AEW that hadn't watched wrestling in 4 or 5 years because they got disenfranchised with WWE, but now their favorite wrestler is back. And not only that, not only him coming back, but his pay-per-view buy rates are still some of the biggest in AEW history. He was the guy that at one point Tony Khan called the Plus Delta, meaning that when CM Punk's on the air, he brings viewers. And that's the thing. It was such a huge signing, and I know now we look at it and we understand what happened since then, and it's pushed it down. That's why this is here on the list and not higher. But just that initial surge of new fans that would not have watched AEW any other way other than CM Punk being there, the people that bought pay-per-views just to watch CM Punk, he made a huge impact on the company. Unfortunately, it didn't have a great ending, but you can't deny the impact he had. I'll go from that on number 5. Fittingly, a guy that tells a referee when he's holding the ropes, "I have to 5, referee." That's the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson. Danielson came in right after CM Punk and almost got overshadowed. And we're talking about a guy who basically came from the WrestleMania main event that year over to AEW and brought, much like CM Punk and Chris Jericho before him, brought a certain fan base with him, albeit most of the fans that loved Bryan Danielson were already probably watching AEW. The crossover from his style of matches and what AEW presents is very similar. Danielson, much like Punk and Y2J, he has a cachet with a casual wrestling fan. If you're going through and you see AEW wrestling, you might click on it and go, "Oh, that's Daniel Bryan. I'll watch this for a little bit," and then it sucks you in, and then you realize, "Oh, I like that guy who was wrestling. Who's that?" And that could be Orange Cassidy. That could be Darby Allin. That could be any number of the talented wrestlers in AEW that you may not have known, but you tuned in to watch Danielson. I feel between that and his locker room presence, he's so important to the company. Hell, he's on the disciplinary committee right now. So yeah, Bryan Danielson's a very important signing in my opinion. I'll go from him our number 4. A guy I've mentioned a couple times already. Whose house? Swerve's house. Swerve Strickland. And some of this is speculation. Some of this is where is he going to be in a year, 2 years, 4 years from now. But in my opinion, Swerve Strickland has all the tools in his toolbox, all the talent, all the charisma to become their version of Sting in WCW, Steve Austin in the Attitude Era, AJ Styles in TNA. He has all of that to become their flag bearer, to become their biggest star. I'm not exaggerating or saying this so you click the video when I say that I think he could reach the heights that Steve Austin reached. I don't think he's going to have 10 million people watching every week, but I do think he could be the biggest star in pro wrestling. I think he's well on his way there. These next few months are going to go a long way because it's obvious he's going to be the world champion, and very, very soon he's going to be the world champion. How they take that belt and put it on him and how he defends that belt going forward over the first few months are going to determine if Swerve is their franchise player or Swerve is just another footnote. I think Swerve's going to be a franchise player. That's why he's so high on my list. That's why I had to put him on there. Now going from that, our number 3. Another guy that you could say is the franchise of AEW. One of the best, quote-unquote, homegrown talents they've had, and that's MJF. Maxwell Jacob Fried. MJF came into the company with a buzz and has portrayed himself as one of the biggest stars in the company. He's been one of the biggest stars. He was one of the longest reigning champions they've had. He's put on great matches with the likes of Samoa Joe, CM Punk, Cody Rhodes, anybody he stepped in the ring with. He's one of the most entertaining wrestlers in the world, and he's one of their best signings, because here was a guy that basically, he had a buzz, people knew who he was, but it wasn't like he was on Ring of Honor, it wasn't like he was on WWE or New Japan. Most of his buzz was working with MLW, which people know of, but it's a smaller company. And no knock on MLW. Good company. I like a lot of their shows. As a side note, in a couple weeks I'm going to an MLW show. So yeah, it's not a knock on them as a company, just in the grand scheme of things, they're a small fish. MJF could be the guy that they had from the beginning that built himself to where he is. One of the most bankable talents they have, one of the guys that they can put on TV, and he's just going to be anything they want to them, whether it be a face. He's shown that he's been able to portray a good face. He's really great as a heel. He has great matches. That's why he's on the list. Now, going from that, our number 2. So I wrote a bunch of people into one for this, because if I separated these guys, they would have been probably 2 through 5. And that is the Elite. And when I talk about the Elite, I mean the group that really started the company. The guys that had the idea for All Out: Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Cody Rhodes, and Hangman Page. The guys that decided as a group they're going to sign with this brand new company, AEW, and help put it on the map. Between them and Chris Jericho, on that first announcement, the buzz was crazy, because here you have some of the most over talent in the wrestling world. Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks are considered one of the great tag teams of all time, even to this day. Kenny Omega, one of the best wrestlers. Hangman Page, an up-and-coming star who's elevated himself in AEW. Without the Elite, there's no All Elite Wrestling, in my opinion. Without All In, there's no All Elite Wrestling. Without New Japan coming to America, which I believe Tony Khan was in the audience from some of those shows, there's no All Elite Wrestling. And the catalyst for all that is the Elite, the Bullet Club. Hence why they're up so high. I grouped them together so that way they didn't take up half the list, but they have to be on here. Now, before I get to my number 1, if you haven't seen my videos before, I do a thing here called the Best of the Rest. Basically, it is things that were considered for the list but didn't quite make it yet. First up, I mentioned him at the very beginning, Will Ospreay. Now, Will, much like Okada, is very much in the early stages of his AEW career. However, he's already put on banger matches. He's already caused a buzz. If you come back, like I said, with Omega 5 years from now, he might be way higher on this list. He's a guy that brings that excitement. He brings that style. He'll mesh well with the Bryan Danielsons of the world, which is going to be his first feud. He'll work great against the Samoa Joes, the people he's already worked with, like Okada, Omega, Jay White, others. He's a great wrestler for that role, especially if they plan to do more in the UK. We know they're going back there again for All In this year, and he'll most likely headline that card. But let's say they start doing 2-3 pay-per-views a year in the UK. You have Will Ospreay at the top of your card, they're probably going to sell very well. By the end of this year, he should be in the mix for the World Championship. That's why he's an important signing, but didn't quite make the list. Next up, the guy I just mentioned, Switchblade Jay White. Jay's one of those signings that hasn't fully lived to his potential yet. That's why he didn't make the list. But they absolutely signed one of the great wrestling talents in the world. When given his opportunity, when given moments, Jay has shined over and over again. He's great on the microphone, he's great in the ring. Him and Juice Robinson had one of the best tag team matches probably in the last decade, if not longer, with FTR. He's just a great wrestler all the way around. And I kind of feel like they still have the training wheels on him. Once they let Jay White fully be Jay White, he's going to be on the top of your card. I would love to see, once that Swerve Strickland wins the world title, Jay White being the first guy he feuds with, because I think him and Jay could have a fantastic feud. both verbally and in the ring. I think it would be great for him to move forward with that. I do think the potential's there for him to be greater, but as of right now, they just haven't pulled the trigger on him. It's a great talent. Last but not least, on the best of the rest, FTR. I just mentioned they had one of the great tag matches of all time, or at least the last 10 years. Much like a Samoa Joe brings credibility to the world title, or Kenny Omega had, or Chris Jericho had, FTR brings credibility to the tag team division. How can you say you have the best tag team division in the world if you don't have arguably one of the best tag teams in the world in that? And it could be argued back and forth, them versus Young Bucks. It's the argument that'll go on forever. Before Jay Briscoe passed, you add the Briscoe brothers into that. Before the Usos split up, you add them into the mix as who the greatest tag team in the world is. But during a very short conversation, the matches that they've had with the Young Bucks, with Jay White and Juice Robinson, with the Acclaimed, with basically everybody, have been great. Unfortunately, I don't think they've suffered a little bit from what Jay White has, and to some extent Samoa Joe, where I feel like they get pushed to the back burner too much, hence why they didn't make the list. Now, before I get to number one, if you think I put someone too high, put someone too low, left someone off the list altogether, let me know down here in the comments. While you're there, smash that like button, share the video, subscribe if you haven't. If you see where it says join, that's how you become a channel member. Becoming a channel member definitely helps me out. With all that being said, my number one AEW signing so far, Jon Moxley. Now, I know Jon is polarizing, Moxley is polarizing. There's a certain sect of fans that do not like him. Jim Cornette thinks he's one of the worst wrestlers in the world. But I think that Jon has proven over and over again that he's a big-time player. He's able to step in the biggest moments on a moment's notice and really help the company. Plus, if we go back to Double or Nothing, the first official AEW show, the big surprise coming into that show was Jon Moxley showing up at the very end. We're talking about a guy that was considered one of the 3 or 4 top stars in WWE. He's a multi-time world champion, always in main events, always figured prominently. In the prime of his career, he jumped ship. And I think that, again, added credibility, much like Jericho did at the time. His championship runs came at perfect times, whether it be one that built him up, or whether he be needed to fill in because somebody got injured, or somebody got suspended. Jon Moxley's always been there and always been ready to fill that spot. And I know there's criticism, he bleeds too much, he brawls too much, but you could say the same things about Mick Foley in his time. You could say the same things about Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes. Go back to an old Crockett era Rhodes and Flair match, they bleed every time. I think he's absolutely the most important guy they've signed so far. I think he's helped the company in star power. He's helped the company when they needed help. He's helped build wrestlers. He's helped build talent. I think Jon Moxley is the best signing they've signed so far. Hence why he's my number one. Again, if you think I put someone too high, too low, left someone off, let me know. If you made it here to the end, let me know who you think the best signing in AEW history is. Could be someone on my list. It could be someone else. Maybe you think Saraya is the best signing, or Malachi Black, or Miro. Maybe signing Darby Allin you think is done best for him. I've left off even a legend like Sting. Maybe you think that was their best signing. Let me know who you think it is. Put it down here in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.